All right, we are live. So everyone, I want to say that Allie and I were just talking before we went live. I think we're both a little nervous to come talk with you guys tonight because we know each other. And there's something very intimate about, I don't know, having the kinds of conversations that you and I might have one-on-one, but here we are together in front of a bunch of people. So I'm feeling, they get to be voyeurs, I guess. So Allie, I just asked, I always just call you Allie. I just asked Allie how to say her last name. Allie Psiuk. Psiuk.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you why she's here. I kind of dragged her along because she's written, God, your book is so good. It's so good and so brave. She's written one of the coolest books ever. And I just told her, I said, I got it. And I've been reading it the last 3 nights. It's very weird to read the memoir of somebody that you know, because I didn't know all these details about your life. So let's start there. I wanna know what compelled you, because you're a therapist for a living and you shared a lot of personal stuff about your life. So that was a risk. What compelled you to do that, Allie?
It kept coming back to me. It would not let me go. I started writing this. It sounds dramatic, right? When I was 25, I was like, I'm writing my memoirs, and it's like, Allie, this is not something someone does when they're 25. But that's a myth, of course. But I started writing it as I was experiencing, the crux of the book, which is the title. So it's, a giveaway, perhaps, that there's no secret, that I experienced a breakdown and a acute psychotic break. And so I started writing it then in 2005, and I put it away. I had it on a floppy disk, and so it's been with me, and then I let it go, and the stories just what would not let me go. And I went through a recent phase over the last few years where it was really calling to me, and I was remembering how important is not the word, that's an understatement, how vital, how necessary mental health based memoirs were for me when I was struggling, and what a lifeline they were. And it's a combination of things, but and I've been in consultation, then, and we've chatted about it. It's like, should I do this? Could I do this? It was not letting go of me, and so I wanted to honor that story, and almost, also as a love letter to my clients, that this is material that I I don't share. I don't know if they'll find it. That's a whole other conversation. But this is me, essentially, right? And I'm asking my clients to honor their stories, and this is some of mine. Yeah.
I remember that first conversation when you were first thinking about writing this book, and the book was potentially going to take a different direction as well. It seemed like there was a motivation for you that had some social justice components to it. Would you be willing to speak to that a little bit? Even though you made some
Yeah.
shifts to the book, but there were, you have some pretty fierce convictions, and you're my go-to person whenever I am wanting to do things with high integrity around injustice. You're the person I talk to. So I want to hear what you have to say.
The book has it has gone through a process, as life does. So in 2005, I started to writing it as personal, life stories. And then I, was traveling through South America, and was really sitting with how our country doesn't hold the memory of its past, specifically of slavery. It was, experiencing, going to all these museums that were holding genocide and Holocaust. And I was reflecting on, the states. It's like we have, we can probably count them on one hand, the amount of museums that we have, that speak to slavery. And so I guess where this, where I'm going with this is I was reflecting on my experience in the criminal justice system and the ways that I got off, and acknowledging that that was a part, my story, my history would be very different if I was not in this white skin that I am in. And so in reflecting on that, I, was like, oh my God, first of all, in writing the personal story, it's like, well, wait, I can only share this because I'm not, in jail or dead, or, there is, it really was a slap in the face, like, oh, wait a minute, Allie, what do you think you can tell your story when so many people cannot? And so I started to research the links between, there was trauma that contributed to my breakdown, the links between trauma and systemic oppression and institutionalization, that they're so, woven in, and, in the criminalization of mental health, but the disparities between, the incarceration of Black and brown folks versus, the white, slap on the wrist, essentially. And it, it took me not down, it took me through learning so much, and writing a book that was a concept book. So I was also working with a writing coach at the time, and I said, I want to blend the personal memoir with a concept book on trauma, and the interlays, or the weavings of institutionalization, with how what I've experienced, folks of color do not get to experience. That I was comparing my stories, things that I've done, things I share in the book, with a Black person's experience, without, there's this line of, I can't speak to a community, a population that I'm not a member of. And my writing coach said, well, you have to do one or the other. It can't be a concept book meets memoir. And I'd always seen it as a hybrid. And I have an eclectic background. I do therapy in an eclectic way. And there is, I would, to be honest, I wish it could have been a more blending. My editor shared, in the last stages, I was like, give me the honest, I was like, tell me, does this, feel like two books? And she was like, kind of, yeah, it does. And it's not, it's actually, I'm not 100% stoked about how it came out. But I'm grateful for the experience of what I learned. It was feeling so behemoth. I was in consultation with Black mental health professionals over the year. 2019, I was really working on it. And I was in conversation with someone up in Canada. I'll just give his first name, David. And he said, I remember I was in Spain, so it was over Zoom. And he was like, Allie, write your story. And in that moment, I felt like I could give myself permission to speak and to share in this way, that perhaps a book on prison reform is not what was not my book to write. That's when, it had a windy path, and I wouldn't change it. But it's, go ahead.
To bring people in, I think that's the piece I want to just express, which is that the book that you were conceptually holding was does my story lend itself to writing a book on prison reform? And do I, as a white person, have a voice in that? But it's beautiful because I was just talking to a Black girlfriend of mine just before we went live. I said, oh man, I'm reading my friend's book and it's so good. And she was going to take it in this different direction. I'm glad she didn't, because her story is so compelling. It's one of those kind of stories where you're like rooting for the character and you're gripped, and like it's very easy to read. It's not, it's a memoir. It's a story. It's rich, and your life was intense and you had a lot of things going on. I do have to talk to you about dancing on cruise ships in a second, but um, I love that you will. So, what happens is, as I'm reading your book, my heart is open, okay, and I'm in your story, and then you go, boom. And if I were Black, this would have been different. And I almost feel like that's more provocative than had you written it differently. I just want to share that that's the impact on me.
And I guess, yeah, it's this. I mean, strange is not the word. I'm always looking for good words to describe things, right? As we're in, the art of therapy, we're always trying to get to like, what is it? What is it? What is the essence? And um, it is chilling. It's like what the question becomes, okay, what do I do with this life now that I have it? And guns were drawn on me and they were not shot. There was a line that I wanted to include that was edited out, and I wanted to say, I didn't go to jail because I was Black, but I got out because I was white. And it was, I guess, confusing for the reader. They said, well, you're not Black. And I was like, yes, I didn't go to jail because I was Black. But I, without a doubt, got out because I was white. And so many people do not.
How comfortable do you feel sharing that part of the story? Because I think for folks that are listening in, we want them to buy your book, but I think they might not know because I know what you're talking about because I've read your book. But
Mm,
that moment that you were driving down the freeway
yeah.
and you were pulled over. Well, you weren't pulled over. You went over, they had put up a blockade for you, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. I was in the grips of, acute psychosis. Yeah. Um, and so I guess yeah, would you like me to share that story, or in the book,
The
kind
high,
of open.
just the high level so that people know why we're
Yeah.
talking about prison reform and how this links to a therapist having a
Yeah.
mental health crisis.
Yeah. So I was arrested. I was held in jail for a few days until they recognized, that I was that it was a mental health uh, challenge. And so then, that hospital was necessary and not jail. And that that happens all the time, right? And so that's the tricky part where um I felt like that concept is so difficult to explore, where um, when what is really needed is a hospital. There's a hospital. There's so many pipelines. A hospital to prison pipeline is one of them, where it's actually a mental health challenge, not a criminal. And so that line of like, what is criminal behavior when it is done under in a state that is of mental decline, and how do we see that, right? I'm remembering there's these images of a white person running naked and the cop is chasing after him, but the gun is clearly pointing it away from the body, right? And so how we respond to bodies in disturbing, bizarre, confusing situations. And I regret if I'm putting the listeners in this kind of confusing state, but maybe that is also a little bit of a flavor of it. Was a deeply disturbing and confusing experience for everyone involved. But how we act in those situations is very different. And that's the piece that needs to be changed. How do we respond to humans in distress without, these patterns of how we've been responding? Yeah.
I just want to highlight that phrase. It was so beautiful. How do we respond to humans in distress?
Mhm.
Mm, Feels
Yeah.
really poignant.
Yeah. Without fear about what that confusion is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, I'll say something, I'll take us in a slightly more uplifting direction. It reminds me of some of the work I'd seen from the guys at Concern, which is a group in San Francisco, which was an alternate to calling the police when someone was having a mental health crisis. And I got to work with them a fair amount because they would come out to the homeless pop-up care village, and we would frequently have someone in a mental health crisis. And they were so just three people would come out and circle the person and sometimes sit on the ground with them and just say, hey, yeah. Oftentimes they knew who they were and would just help de-escalate and regulate that person, be super relational and tender and kind and available and patient. They just waited the person out. Say, yeah, I know you want to go do that. I know you want to bust down that window. Let's just hang out here, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sweet.
That's mhm. Reminding me
So
of my oh, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. I'm
Well,
listening.
I only had one community mental health class in grad school, but there was y- the piece around psychosis, right? It's like someone struggling with for example schizophrenia, right? Like that piece might not ever change, but then we have the whole other human, right? And in that example that you just shared, it's like honoring that the whole human. It's like, yeah, that's a part of it. Okay, you want to do that, and we're just sitting down together talking, right? To not be not have that one part of whatever that is be, oh my god, he's going to do, or she, or they're going to do this, right? It's not. It's like, well, actually in the moment right now we're just sitting down having a conversation. It sees the full picture and not just
Yeah.
the mm.
Yeah. Can I ask you about I mean, I'm kind of didn't know. So first of all, I met you for the first time at a sidewalk talk event, and I thought you were really cool. And I'm like, oh, she's really cool. She's like, she has all this belonging over there with all those people. And I felt shy actually, because you were with the folks from the well, I think. And to read your book, I was like, oh, that's interesting to hear kind of how belonging was such an unrequited longing, really. I mean, even working hours a day in a gymnastics center, it didn't ever feel like there was deep belonging. And then when you would get it with somebody, they'd leave. And I just wanted to hear more about the role gymnastics and even your body played in helping you survive and maybe also harming.
Yeah, yeah.
And for those listening, I mean, Allie's was a competitive gymnast, an elite gymnast for till you were 16?
Yeah, yeah. It you know, this is that fine line, and I think listeners know that you're a parent. Am I outing you by saying that?
No, I'm completely transparent. Yeah.
It, and I don't have children. It's reminding me of, we want to celebrate children, and we also want to be careful about not pigeonholing, but having that be right. Children respond to validation, and we have to be careful, right? I was celebrated, validated for what my body could do. I, excelled early on, whatever that was in me that allowed me to kind of propel myself through the levels in gymnastics. Um, I kind of latched on to that, right? It gave me a sense of identity and belonging, but it was through performance, right? Which is, what I could do versus who I was. And so that's the damaging part of it. Yeah, it brings to mind, like, how do we celebrate carefully in children? Or there's a whole area around
Mm.
yeah, the preciousness of the brain at that developmental time.
Yeah, so that you're not driving them in a direction that maybe isn't their authentic direction is what I hear you
Yeah,
saying. Mm. Yeah.
yeah. Like, had anyone slowed down and said, do you like this, Allie? Do you want to go to the gym? would have said, I would have been so relieved and said, oh my God, no, this is the last thing I want to do. I never wanted to do it. And so, and in conversation with my father, he says, oh, we thought you loved it, which is so interesting, right? How much the kids can stomach or how we can contort ourselves to hide, because it brings us love or the perception of love. Um,
Mm.
which then, go ahead.
No, I when you speak, I always feel like you're the best listener between the lines that I've ever met. You listen between the lines. You
Mm.
listen in the white spaces. Well, that's how I feel when we talk. Um, and I guess as you pick apart this whole experience that you've had and listening to yourself, as painful as it was, how do you feel like it's shaped who you are now?
Mm. Well, it certainly has led me to being a therapist, with spending so
A
much
good
time in
one.
my internal with the is di-
Take it in.
that's a good practice. Thank you for reminding me that. And it's like what is good? It's being present. My hope and my
Mhm.
goal is to be present for clients and to be present for life. Um, being, being alone and lonely and being kind of, in my internal dialogue has made me so curious and want to understand, to be in the psyches of others, right? Um, I was kayaking with a friend in New Jersey, and we saw a bird's nest. And I said, and she's a therapist. I said, oh, don't you want to just like look in the nest, like crawl up there and see what's in there? And she was like, no, that would be horrible. Would scare away whatever was in there. And I was like, oh, this is our different styles of like therapeutic approaches. That I'm so curious, right? It's like, what's in the nest? Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Um, can I ask some goofy, silly questions?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So you left gymnastics. You were woefully did not tell enough stories about dancing jobs. So can you please tell me about so you were dancing in like on cruise ships and dancing in where in Florida?
So I
And what
dropped.
kind of dancing?
Oh, all of it, all of it. Except I never had a paid gig as a tap dancer. I had auditioned for a knockoff style of a European circus, so did, some of that until that work dried up. Did some modern company work until I realized, there was no money in modern dance and it hurt. Just dabbling in different areas of did the showgirl step touch thing on a stage in like fishnets and heels, and just was like I didn't fall in love with any
Mm,
choreography, so I
yeah.
think that was maybe why that chapter ran short. Of it didn't kind of get to run its course. I couldn't sing. Yeah. Which is, in New York, you got to be able to sing or at least hold a tune. Although I've heard some friends share that their microphones never got turned on, that they'd be hired as a dancer in a show and they're like, wait, my mic's not on. Um, but dancing, movement, that also led to me studying somatic psychotherapy, which uses the body as the primary means of inquiry. So I'm always curious about my clients' bodies and the movement that happens in session. Um, I don't know if there's any other funny stories I can share.
Well, so how did you wind up
How
dancing
do
on a cruise ship, please? And what were you doing on said cruise ship?
Well, there's that performer, right? Perhaps, I was trained to perform in gymnastics. And so, in getting a job, I wasn't really valuing my intellect. So college wasn't really a thing for me. So I actually after I dropped out of high school and because I got a dance job. So it was just kind of like, well, who's going to hire me to do this thing? I don't have any other skills in life other than like moving my body. And so just running the gamut on all the audition circuits, in New York in the late 90s. And that was one of the gigs and it was seen as a good gig because, you didn't have any bills, so you could save money. And you get to, hop around and see some, beautiful sights and it was complex, but I'm remembering sitting in the hot tub on the back of a cruise ship, watching the sunset, and then like, doing a show later in the night. So for those years, it was a really growth-filled, expansive, fun, and complicated time. Yeah.
Mm. What's your favorite part of the book? Favorite or most fun to write anyway, if there was a fun part to write?
It was so easy and fun to write about my grandmother and my mother. And actually, I've heard people's feedback. They're like, oh, Baba, my grandmother.
Baba
They're like, she's my favorite
and
part. Or,
Dido,
there could be a whole book, on
just on
them.
Baba and Dido. Is it Dido? Is that how you say it? Dido?
We would say Dido.
Dido,
Yeah.
Baba and Dido.
Mm-hmm.
Cute.
Yeah. That in those, and it was my grandmother on my father's side, but the writing about my mother was another level of healing. Writing about my mom wasn't easy, but it was certainly therapeutic. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was curious, did you ever take some of this writing into your own therapist's office and say, oh my God, I need to process some of this with you because this was just really heavy to get down on paper?
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. The therapist that I was working with at the time, um, yeah, I needed that holding, and I didn't think it would be so evocative, right? It's like, okay, I've been in therapy for 20 years, and how many more tears can I shed on this? And who knew? Yes, there's more. Um, and I actually, I needed, shouldn't say I needed, but for 5 years, I worked with a therapist. I was assigned to through a program. And she was Black, and there were people in my life, close friends, where they were like, I didn't know your therapist was Black, and the assumption of like, you know therapists being white, there's that piece, but in sharing with her about what I was writing about, she was like, this is going to be difficult, and I support you. And there was something really, deeply meaningful and necessary that because I share also some of our work. She's reading it now, and so that feels really, um, just all the feels about that it comes full circle. But yeah, therapy is a necessary for writing a book, certainly. Mhm.
It's necessary for my life, but yes, for writing a book too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I gotta ask, because people ask me too, because I say a lot about my personal life, in doing podcast interviews like this, etc. I'm curious what somersaults or wrestling you did inside when you thought about, hey, my clients might pick up this book. They might know something about my life.
Mm. And listening to a lot of Yalom, and
Mm,
he's quite disclosing, or at least I was listening to The Gift of Therapy recently,
mm,
and I would say it was always clear, and someone asked, what stories, how did you know what stories to include? And I would just say, that it just kind of organically came together, and the it was, I guess what I'm saying is, it was kind of always like a yes, that I've been sitting with this material and digesting it and integrating it for so long that it felt clear, and I felt a sense of resolve about, what I wanted to offer, to the community, whoever that it finds the book. So I say that now, without, while it being in the stages of it being new, and my clients haven't, no one has to my information, brought it up, but I will sit with that as fodder for our relationship, as therapist and client, if when they do. Yeah.
Yeah. One of our Sidewalk Talk chapter leaders runs a mental health clinic, and she also wrote a book for the church about how the church responds to people in acute psychosis, and she also was hospitalized. So it's a really powerful testament, I think, to be willing to sort of say, hey, there's a way through this, and it's I have a thriving life, and to also be doing what is your own version of activism, to say, we can do better. We can do better. Which leads me, I mean, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. It leads me to want to ask you, what do you wish we did better when people are in these acute places?
Ooh,
And maybe I'll let you dream big and say without constraint, if there were no constraints.
yeah. Yeah. I guess I take the spiritual emergence perspective of allowing for the experience, well, without restraints. It's interesting, right? Because then there's a line of, well, when will someone do harm to themselves or others?
I don't mean restraints on the person. I mean without
No.
restraints of society's budgets and policies. But what would you
Yeah.
do to change our collective response?
Yeah. I think, and I was taking that word like metaphorically, and then I start from the metaphor and then I bring it to
Okay.
the literal. So I was, but if there was no restraints, to allow for the experience to emerge and to have that be held in therapeutic community, and also bringing in the family, right? I mean, it's something that my family has never talked about. To have had family therapy after that, would have been, yeah, just so profound, so healing. So I think bringing in everyone to say, what happened here, right? Doesn't Is that the title of Oprah's book, like what happened to you, right? To bring in, um, caring hands in lieu of, the shaming or the blaming or the stigma or it's like, well, let's not talk about that, right? This did not happen in isolation. This happened in community, right? There's so many factors that go into it. So I don't know what that would look like. It would certainly, take openness and participation, right, from folks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The word that stands out and how you just responded is community, that you bring the entire experience into the community, and that the community holds the entire experience as a communal experience, because the
Yeah,
experience was co-created in community.
right. When you were in San Francisco, had you heard about Trouble Coffee? The
Mm-mm.
woman that started that? I wish I could recall her name. She started the coffee spot with like, four ingredients that really kept her going through. I think it's a schizoaffective disorder. I could be wrong with that, but she was like, I need people in my community. She's like, I wear the same thing every day so that people know who I am, so that if she's, kind of like wandering or, just on the wrong block, someone can say like, hey, are you okay, that they recognize her. And so she started the coffee spot as this grounding spot. And I don't want to speak to her experience. This is what I've gathered from articles, that she makes herself known to others so that it's like, I need you, right? I need you to see me, right? I'm familiar. Do you see me? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. It reminds me of this experience that we had at Sidewalk Talk where we had someone who was likely schizophrenic, um, or schizoaffective that was walking up and down the line of chairs as people were talking. And she was disruptive and people were getting put off and annoyed. And I was the greeter and the space holder. And holding this value and watching what the guys from Concern had done, I'm like, well, I'm just going to try to see if I can
Oh,
meet
wow.
her. So what I did is I'm like, hey, it seems like you want to play. Like it seems like, can we play in a different way? And so we started like skipping and walking and kind of dancing around, like around the outside of the chairs. And then she started telling me some interesting stories. And the
Oh,
longer I paid attention to her, the more regulated she became, the more in her right mind she became. It was fascinating to watch. And she was a little bit magical too, because she was an she's like older Asian woman in her 40s or 50s. And she said, I want to meet a young Irish man with pink underwear. And I said, and I swear to God, we met a young Irish guy with pink underwear.
you
And
can't
I
see
said,
my face.
okay. And I told her, I said, I think
Right.
you're magic. And she was just so thrilled with herself. Because one of the people coming to sit down was Irish. I said, okay, can I ask you something? What color are your underwear? And he says, they're pink. And I'm like,
Um,
she's like, see, I told you
yeah.
he exists. We just
So
had such a good time.
this opens up a whole world of curiosity around, and it's bringing to mind, folks who struggle with seizures, where they'll have a vision of something, and not to get too far out there, but, what is the truth, right? How do you honor this person's experience? There's such a childlike, um, magical wisdom there that you followed this, or you met her where she was at, first of all, right? And then, um, it's so curious, right? And it brings to mind, again, this spiritual emergence. It's like, what does this person know that I don't know? And if the how fascinating, right? We don't. That could be right. Some societies would say, "Oh, this person, is not well. They need to take their medication. They need, to be even, in Indonesia, right? People are shackled still."
Mm.
um, in cases when they just don't understand what's going on with the person. So it's like, well, do we control and smash this out of fear, or do we follow it? And then there's an Irish dude with pink underwear, right? It's so curious and fascinating, and um,
And what she represented for everybody on the sidewalk that day, right? Like what her spirit was representing for everybody that was there on a Friday evening coming home from work. I mean, I just think of all the symbolism of everything that she represented that we couldn't express in our own hearts, our playfulness, our joy, our magic, our wonder, um, our non-constraint, our willingness to break rules and skip down the middle of the sidewalk where people are listening, you know? I mean, granted, we had she wasn't a
yeah,
danger. We've had some dangerous folks too, and that's a little different, right? But, and it required, I really remember that day I was, more able. I just didn't treat her as less than. I really did feel
yeah,
just, I just wanted to know who she was. I'm like, okay, this is how
yeah,
you're wired. I
yeah,
mean, I have two core values, learning and play. And I'm like, lady, you're fun. So I'm going to hang out with you because you're fun.
yeah. And I guess I want to honor, there's in what I've, been digging into it can be somewhat controversial, right? It's like, well, okay, you can say, on one hand, and perhaps I'm holding, I don't know, you have your rainbows, and and I'm like a double or triple Scorpio. So I guess I'm always holding the shadow part of, someone coming in and saying, yes, well, your parents weren't killed by someone who was in psychosis, or, people who have experienced the darker side of, what can happen when, if we were, you trusted in that moment, right? And you went with it, and it worked out. And then there's, some folks who would say, well, we can't honor, these frightening experiences because it could lead to danger. And I guess that's a question that we're all sitting with that doesn't have an answer around is how do we hold this, how do we hold mental illness as a collective? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's case by case and trying to figure out how to not be in danger. I'm going to be political. If we had fewer guns on the street, then we could have lots of people be having psychotic breaks and not feel so scared of them because there wouldn't be so many guns all over the place, right? I was talking to a friend of mine in the UK, and the police officers don't carry guns, you know?
Yeah,
And the police officer's first priority is to protect people, not property.
right.
So it's a different paradigm, So suddenly, what is dangerous is different in a different context, too. So
Mhm.
I know we're nearing the end of time. We're at the end of time. I do want to ask one more question before we have our closing. What brings you, so even though I am the rainbows, I was showing Allie my new sweater with the rainbows and the clouds. Um, I don't think you're always, I've never met you as, experienced you as dark, but we're talking about dark stuff today. But I want to ask you about the rainbows part of you, like what brings you joy now? So you've come out of this dark experience. What
Yeah.
makes you come alive and as an adult now today? What just lights you up?
Mm. I've living and experiencing life, and I've been traveling for some time, so I am in love with seeing as much as of the earth, of the globe, of the people as I can. I thrive on new experiences. I'm currently in Mexico right now, and my happiest moments in life are in water. So recently it's experiencing cenotes and swimming in these underground caves. What brings me joy is being in water. Yeah, which I
Mm.
guess is in the world of emotion, right? And water are very similar. As swimming in as many of the Earth's lakes, rivers, streams, oceans, seas, all of it. Yeah, yeah. That's what's bringing me most joy, and getting the time with friends. There's been as we all have had that deficit. That is a big priority and source of grounding and absolute delight is spending time with humans in meaningful dialogue and conversation and time. Yeah, yeah.
There's a smile. So we do this thing, this ritual for ending our podcast conversations, which is I hand over the mic completely to you, and you're in conversation with the Sidewalk Talk listeners that choose to sit their bodies out on sidewalks all over the world and listen to strangers. And you can offer them a wish, or you can offer them words of wisdom. We had someone sing a song a few weeks ago. Whatever feels straight from the heart, what would you want to say to them?
I would, the a Buddhist sentiment is coming to mind that, I would wish may everyone, may we all be free from internal and external harm. And then I would add to that, I think I saw it on a magnet in South Africa. May you have freedom of thought. May your thought not be limited. So may you feel joy in having freedom of thought, and may you be free from internal and external harm.
Beautiful.
Mm.
Everyone needs to go out and buy this book. You and I both, I learned from your book that you love books. I think that I love books maybe as much as you. Uh, Thank you so much, Allie, for being here. And the book is called Breakdown, A Therapist's Journey, Losing It and Finding It.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I hope I remember this conversation for a really long time. Thank you so much.